On April 2, 2023, Staff Sergeant James Mitchell opened an email that would change his life forever. A routine DNA test, required by the military, revealed something he never expected. He was not the biological father of his two children. James, or Jim, as everyone called him, was the kind of man people admired, a model soldier at Fort Liberty, respected by his peers and adored by his community. His family seemed picture-perfect: his wife Sarah, their sweet daughter Emma, and their energetic son Lucas. Together, they lived in a beautiful home on the base, attended church every Sunday, and hosted lively neighborhood barbecues. But behind that picture-perfect life was a devastating secret, a secret Sarah had been hiding for 8 years. It involved her ex-boyfriend, Michael. That single DNA test unraveled everything Jim thought he knew about his family. Over the next 3 months, this revelation would push a good man to his absolute breaking point. By July 4th, 2023, 4 people would be dead, and a once happy family would be at the center of a tragedy that shocked the nation. This is the story of how one email didn't just destroy a marriage, it shattered lives and left 2 families in ruins. James Mitchell's story began in a quiet town in Ohio. With a father who served in Desert Storm, military service wasn't just a calling, it was in his blood. At 22, fresh out of college, James proudly followed in his father's footsteps and joined the Army. It didn't take long for his natural leadership and sharp intellect to stand out. By the age of 34, James had risen to the rank of Staff Sergeant, serving as a respected military intelligence specialist at Fort Liberty. His 2 tours in Afghanistan earned him a Bronze Star for exceptional service during a critical intelligence operation. Among his peers, one thing was clear: if a mission needed to succeed, you called on Mitchell. Jim was the guy everyone wanted to be, recalls Captain Robert Hayes, his commanding officer. He never complained, always took on the toughest assignments, and put his team first. He was the kind of soldier who makes America proud. The summer of 2015 would change everything. At Fort Liberty's annual community fair, Jim's life took an unexpected turn. He spotted Sarah Cooper at a fundraising booth, selling homemade lemonade to support the local elementary school. What began as a polite exchange turned into Jim buying cup after cup, just to keep talking to her. Sarah wasn't just strikingly beautiful. She had a warmth about her, a way of lighting up every room she entered. As a 3rd-grade teacher, she was adored by her students and their parents. Her classroom was always a standout, winning awards for its creative decorations, and her students consistently scored among the highest in the state. Their wedding in June 2016 was a highlight of the year at Fort Liberty. Over 200 guests filled the base's main chapel to witness Sarah and Jim exchange vows. Sarah wore a breathtaking white gown, her 6-foot train trailing gracefully behind her as sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows. Jim stood tall and proud in his dress blues, his medals gleaming under the warm light. It was a picture-perfect ceremony that everyone talked about for months. In March 2017, their joy grew with the arrival of their first child, Emma Mitchell. From the moment she was born, friends and neighbors couldn't help but admire her striking features. "Those green eyes are just like her mama's side of the family," they would say. Jim was utterly smitten, wrapped around her tiny fingers from day one. 2 years later, in May 2019, their son Lucas joined the family. He was another beautiful baby, with the same piercing green eyes and auburn hair. Jim took 2 weeks of paternity leave, spending every moment walking the floors at night with Lucas, assembling the nursery by hand, and quietly promising to always protect his little boy. The Mitchells became the family everyone admired. Their home on Garrison Avenue was a model of perfection. Sarah's flower gardens won the base's Best Yard contest 3 years in a row. Their Memorial Day barbecues were a community favorite, with Jim at the grill serving up his famous ribs. Sarah was deeply involved with the school PTA, organizing bake sales and school events, while their children excelled in both academics and sports. But just 5 miles from their seemingly perfect life was Michael Turner, the owner of Turner's Elite Fitness. Michael was a successful local businessman who had opened the gym after ending a 3-year relationship back in 2015, a relationship few people knew had been with Sarah Cooper. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches with striking green eyes and auburn hair, Michael kept himself in peak physical condition. His gym was popular among military families, offering special discounts for service members. Occasionally, Sarah attended morning yoga classes there, exchanging polite but brief hellos with Michael whenever their paths crossed. Then came March 2023. The military announced a new DNA testing program, presented as part of a routine medical update for all active duty personnel. Officially called the Family Health Initiative, the program was described as a way to improve medical care for service members and their families. April 2nd started like any other Monday. Jim was at his desk, reviewing intelligence reports. At 2:34 p.m., an email arrived from the military health system. The subject line read, DNA profile results, SSG, James Mitchell. The first paragraph was standard medical jargon, routine, clinical, and impersonal. But the second paragraph stopped Jim's heart. Genetic compatibility testing indicates no biological relationship with registered dependents Emma Mitchell, age 8, and Lucas Mitchell, age 6. For 4 hours, Jim sat at his desk, completely motionless. His coffee went cold. His phone buzzed with unanswered messages. Over and over, he reread the email, trying to make sense of the impossible. He double-checked the test numbers, cross-referenced birth certificates, and verified Social Security numbers, but nothing changed. The results were undeniable. That evening, Jim walked into his home as if he were a stranger. Emma ran to greet him, her green eyes sparkling with joy. Lucas handed him a drawing from school, his auburn hair falling across his forehead. For the first time, Jim truly looked at his children, really saw them. The same green eyes, the same auburn hair. And with every glance, he couldn't help but think of Michael Turner in the gym just 5 miles away. For 2 agonizing weeks, Jim carried this knowledge alone, like a weight pressing down on his chest. Every morning, he woke up beside Sarah, kissed her goodbye, played with the kids, and maintained his daily routine as if nothing had changed. But inside, the questions haunted him relentlessly, leaving him no peace. No one at Fort Liberty had any idea what was coming. No one could see the cracks forming in the perfect Mitchell family. And no one could imagine that Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, a decorated war hero and respected leader, was on the verge of uncovering a betrayal that would lead to one of the darkest chapters in Fort Liberty's history. After 2 weeks of sleepless nights, Jim Mitchell's military intelligence instincts took over. If there was one thing he was trained to do, it was to uncover the truth. Each night, after Sarah went to bed, Jim retreated to his home office, determined to piece together the past 8 years of his life. The first crack in the illusion appeared in the phone records. Late one night, Jim discovered that Sarah had a second phone, tucked away in her gym bag and registered under her maiden name, Sarah Cooper. The phone logs told a devastating story, thousands of calls and text messages exchanged with a single number. That number belonged to Michael Turner. The timing of the messages was even more damning. Some were sent while Jim was serving overseas in Afghanistan. Others came during family dinners, on holidays, even on their wedding anniversaries. But Jim knew phone records alone weren't enough. He needed undeniable proof. His next focus was Turner's Elite Fitness. Jim drafted a formal request to the gym, citing state privacy laws that allowed individuals to access footage of themselves or their immediate family members. Michael Turner refused at first, citing member privacy concerns. The resistance only fueled Jim's suspicion. Through his military legal office, Jim connected with Mark Davidson, a civilian attorney experienced in handling complex cases. Davidson wasted no time. He sent a preservation letter to Turner's Elite Fitness, legally preventing them from deleting any security footage. Then he filed an emergency court order requesting access to specific footage from the gym's parking lot and entrance during Sarah's regular workout times. The court granted the order within 48 hours. Michael Turner had no choice but to comply. The footage was sent over on a carefully edited hard drive, with other gym members' identities blurred for privacy. What Jim saw confirmed his worst fears. 3 mornings a week, like clockwork, Sarah's Toyota would pull into the parking lot at 8:30 a.m. Minutes later, Michael's black BMW would arrive. The pattern was unmistakable. They would leave the same way, Sarah first, followed by Michael a few minutes later. This routine matched perfectly with Sarah's supposed morning yoga classes. The financial records revealed an even deeper betrayal. Jim found small, regular transfers from Sarah's personal account. $200 here, $300 there. The amounts were deliberately modest, just enough to avoid raising suspicion. But over 8 years, those transactions added up to over $50,000. The money was being deposited into a joint account at First Carolina Bank. The other name on the account? Michael Turner. Determined to uncover every detail, Jim hired David Martinez, a former military investigator turned private detective. Martinez's findings left no room for doubt. He uncovered photos of Michael Turner attending nearly every major milestone in Emma and Lucas's lives: school plays, soccer games, birthday parties. Michael was always there, watching from the sidelines, careful to stay out of Jim's line of sight. The final blow came from the fertility clinic records. During Jim's 2016 deployment, Sarah had visited Carolina Family Planning. On every form, under partner's name, she had written Michael Turner. The clinic staff never questioned it. To them, Michael was just a successful gym owner and a loving husband, eager to start a family with his wife. They never knew Jim existed. The confrontation happened on a quiet Tuesday evening. Jim waited until Emma and Lucas were fast asleep upstairs. In the kitchen, he spread the evidence across the table, the same table where they'd shared family meals, celebrated birthdays, and laughed together for 8 years. When Sarah walked in from loading the dishwasher, her steps slowed. She saw the papers, the undeniable proof of her betrayal. She didn't look surprised or shocked. Her face showed something worse: resignation. "I never stopped loving him," Sarah said, her voice steady but cold. The words sliced through the air like a blade. "Michael and we tried breaking up when I met you, but we couldn't stay apart." Jim's hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. His voice trembled with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "Never stopped loving him? I was the one there for every nightmare, every scraped knee, every school morning. I taught Lucas how to ride his bike. I helped Emma learn to read." Tears welled in his eyes as he turned and walked away, leaving the evidence and Sarah behind. At 11:42 p.m., Sarah made a phone call that would later become key evidence in the investigation. Police would find the recorded call in the weeks to come. "He knows everything," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "What do we do now?" Michael's response was chillingly calm. "It's time to tell the truth. All of it. The kids deserve to know their real father." The next morning was the hardest moment of Jim's life. He sat at the breakfast table with Emma and Lucas, their small faces looking up at him with innocence and trust. Sarah tried to explain the unexplainable, using words that children too young to understand betrayal couldn't fully grasp. Emma, wise beyond her 8 years, asked the question that shattered Jim's already broken heart. "Do I have to stop calling you Daddy now?" Lucas, just 6 years old, looked at Jim, confusion and fear in his eyes. "But you're my daddy," he said over and over, as if saying it enough times would make it true. "You're my daddy." By that afternoon, word had spread through Fort Liberty like wildfire. In the tight-knit military community, secrets never stayed secret for long. Jim's fellow soldiers rallied around him, offering support in the only ways they knew how. But Sarah? She quickly found herself isolated. At school pickup, mothers turned their backs. Her once prized PTA position quietly went to someone else. The weekend brought even more heartbreak as families began choosing sides. Jim's parents drove 16 hours from Ohio as soon as they heard. His mother, Ellen Mitchell, walked into the house and couldn't even look at Sarah. Jim's father, Robert Sr., a decorated Vietnam veteran, took one look at his son's haunted expression and understood. "This marriage is over," he told Jim quietly. Sarah's family was no less divided. Her younger sister Amanda tried to defend her actions, pointing to the loneliness and sacrifices that military wives endure. But her father, retired Marine Master Sergeant Thomas Cooper, was unforgiving. At a tense family dinner, he confronted Sarah with a heavy heart. "You didn't just break your vows," he said, his voice filled with disappointment. "You disrespected every military family who endures deployments and separations with honor." The truth was out, and the damage was done. But what no one at Fort Liberty could have predicted was how these revelations would push a good man, one admired and respected by all, past his breaking point. The darkest chapter of this story was yet to be written. By May 2023, the quiet rumblings of change were already evident in Jim Mitchell's life. He had filed for divorce from Sarah, but he still wanted the kids. He still wanted to be their father. Sarah had moved the kids into a small apartment just minutes from the base, and Jim had moved into the barracks. But at Fort Liberty, Jim was becoming a different man. His transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was noticeable. Staff Sergeant Mitchell was always first in formation, Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez later told investigators. Then one morning he showed up 5 minutes late. His boots weren't polished. The next day, same thing. For someone like Mitchell, that was a red flag. In the span of 3 weeks, Jim received 2 counseling statements for tardiness. His uniform, once crisp and sharp enough to cut through paper, now hung loose on his frame. He'd lost 20 pounds, and dark circles had settled under his eyes, the product of sleepless nights and constant torment. Captain Sarah Henderson, the base counselor, documented his first mandatory session. Patient sat motionless for 40 minutes. When he spoke, his voice cracked. His words, "I raised those kids. 8 years, 8 birthdays, 8 Christmases. Now they say I'm not their father." During physical training, Jim's behavior grew more erratic. He pushed himself beyond safe limits, running until he threw up. He would be in the gym at 3 a.m., Private First Class Thompson recalled, doing push-ups until his arms gave out. It was like he was punishing himself. Life in the barracks, away from the family home he had once shared with Sarah and the kids, crushed him. Jim's roommate, Specialist Mark Wilson, noticed strange behavior. He'd wake up screaming the kids' names. During the day, he'd just sit on his bed staring at photos of them on his phone. He didn't talk much anymore. The custody battles were financially draining. Jim's military attorney, Major Patricia Chen, fought tirelessly on his behalf, arguing for his rights as a psychological parent. 8 years of active fatherhood shouldn't disappear just because of DNA, she told the court. But family courts weighed biological ties more heavily, and Jim's heartache deepened with every hearing. In court, Jim always sat straight-backed in his dress blues. He watched lawyers argue over his right to see the children he'd raised from birth. The judge ruled for supervised visitation, 2 hours, twice a week. Those visits were a form of torture. "Daddy, why can't we go home?" Lucas would ask, his confusion clear. Emma, ever the quiet one, would barely speak. Jim would try to bring their favorite snacks, to play the old games they used to enjoy together, but everything felt off. The social worker's watchful eyes made it all feel wrong. Chaplain Robert Freeman noticed Jim's increasing attendance at daily services. He asked questions about forgiveness, about God's plan. He couldn't understand why God would let him raise children only to take them away, the chaplain later recounted. Meanwhile, Jim's work began to suffer. Intelligence reports piled up unanswered. Colonel Matthews called him in one afternoon. "Mitchell, you've got 30 days to get yourself straight. After that, we're looking at administrative action." Fellow soldiers noticed the shift in Jim, too. They invited him to cookouts, movie nights, fishing trips, anything to get him to join. But Jim, once a man of community and camaraderie, declined every invitation. "I'm fine," he would say, though his actions said otherwise. He stopped answering his phone, cutting off contact with everyone who tried to help. The base gym became his only refuge. "He'd be there when we opened at 0500, the gym manager reported. Sometimes he'd stay until closing, just punching the bag or lifting weights until exhaustion." The base doctor prescribed sleeping pills to help Jim cope, but he never filled the prescription. He stopped eating at the dining facility, surviving only on protein bars and energy drinks, while his body grew weaker with every passing day. By late June, Jim's legal options were running out. The final custody hearing was set for July 5th, and his lawyer was preparing arguments focused on the children's best interests. But looming over everything was the DNA evidence that could shatter his already fragile hopes of regaining his children. On July 3rd, Jim Mitchell spent his final hours methodically preparing for what was to come. His room was cleaned and organized, his civilian clothes donated to the base thrift shop. He paid all his outstanding charges and even left an envelope with cash for his share of the internet bill. His last day at work, July 4th, seemed almost normal. Jim showed up in his perfectly pressed uniform, cleared his inbox, returned borrowed office supplies, and thanked his commanding officer for everything. But there was something different about him, something that even his closest friends couldn't quite put their finger on. That evening, Jim sat at his barracks desk, writing. 15 pages of neat handwriting explained everything he couldn't say out loud. His last written words: "A father isn't made by DNA. A father is made by love. And I loved them more than life itself." No one at Fort Liberty realized that each failed counseling session, each lost legal battle, and each lonely night had been another step toward tragedy. The decorated soldier who had survived firefights in Afghanistan had finally found a battle he couldn't win. The next morning, Fort Liberty would awaken to news that would shake the entire military community. July 4th, 2023, Magnolia Gardens Apartments, Building C, Apartment 304. Located just 2 miles from Fort Liberty's main gate on Skybow Road, this was where Sarah Mitchell had started her new life with the children months earlier. That morning began with promise. Security cameras captured Sarah leading Emma and Lucas to the apartment complex pool. Emma wore her American flag swimsuit, while Lucas proudly showed off his new swimming goggles to neighbors. They planned to watch the base fireworks from their third-floor balcony later that evening. Maria Rodriguez, their downstairs neighbor, watched the family that morning. The kids were so happy, splashing in the pool. Emma kept practicing her underwater handstands. Lucas wouldn't take off his new goggles, even to eat his snack, she recalled. After the pool, Sarah took the children grocery shopping. Security cameras showed them returning with bags full of holiday treats: hot dogs for grilling, sparklers for the evening, and ingredients for Emma's favorite Independence Day cupcakes. The children spent the afternoon decorating their balcony with small American flags, their excitement captured on the apartment's Ring doorbell camera. Meanwhile, miles away at Fort Liberty Barracks, Jim Mitchell prepared for what he had planned. He changed into civilian clothes, tucked his service pistol into its case, and carefully placed his 15-page letter in a manila envelope. Security footage showed him walking calmly to his white Ford F-150. The guard at Magnolia Gardens' security booth would later recall Jim's arrival. He seemed completely normal, showed his military ID, mentioned visiting his kids, even smiled and wished me a happy 4th. The Ring camera outside apartment 304 captured the children's last happy moments. Lucas shouted, "Daddy," while Emma wrapped herself around Jim's legs. Sarah stood back, arms crossed, watching Jim enter with a small bag of sparklers, a final gift that would never be opened. Tom Parker in apartment 302 would later tell the investigators, "It started with quiet voices. Then we heard crying, a man crying, a woman yelling about moving on and real father. We should have called someone. Maybe if we had..." Emma's last phone call reached her grandmother in Ohio. "Mommy and Daddy are fighting really bad," she whispered. "Lucas is scared." Ellen Mitchell immediately contacted the police, but they classified it as a routine domestic dispute. The first gunshot shattered the holiday peace in Building C. Jennifer Martinez in apartment 305 made the frantic 911 call, her voice shaking as she reported gunshots and screaming. Police arrived within minutes, only to hear the final shot as they reached the third floor. Inside apartment 304, holiday decorations created a chilling contrast to the tragedy. Sarah lay near the couch she had chosen for her fresh start. Emma and Lucas, still in their swimsuits, were found in their bedrooms. Jim's body was discovered in the master bedroom, his service pistol nearby. On the granite kitchen counter, beside Emma's half-finished Independence Day cupcakes, lay Jim's letter. "To whoever finds us, I'm sorry. A father is more than DNA." The words trailed across 15 pages of neat handwriting, explaining what DNA tests could never measure. As news spread, Fort Liberty fell silent. Hundreds of soldiers and families gathered in the main post chapel, seeking answers that would never come. Colonel Matthews addressed the stunned community. "Today we lost not just a soldier and his family members. We lost our way as a community. We missed the signs. We failed them all." The tragic reality was that no one could have predicted the depth of Jim's pain, nor the devastating path he chose as an escape. Now we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this heartbreaking case? Do you think anything could have been done to prevent it? Leave a comment below and share your perspective. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story compelling, please give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on more stories like this. Your support means everything. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.